Welcome everyone. The hour being 5:30 p.m. on Wednesday, November 1st, 2023. The Tooele City Council and the Redevelopment Agency are meeting in a work meeting. This meeting is being held at the Tooele City Hall Council Chambers located at 90 North Main Street. This is also being streamed on the Tooele City YouTube channel. We will start with a roll call. Councilwoman Manzio.
Present.
Councilman Graff.
Present.
He's joining us by phone right now. Councilman McCall.
Present.
I'm Councilman Brady. I'm also present. Councilman Hanson is running a few minutes late and will be joining us shortly. We will move on to item 3, which is the mayor's report.
Thank you, Chairman and Council. I have just really a follow-up that I wanted to present to you this evening because there was some public comments in your meeting 2 weeks ago about the animal shelter. So I just thought that I would give you an update so that the residents and also you would know what we're doing. So following that meeting, I met with the shelter supervisor and of course the department head and also Zell that presented that night, who is the volunteer coordinator for our shelter. And we discussed lots of things, and we did agree that maybe there was some information that was presented that was not accurate, so we want to make sure that you know all of that. These numbers here, a lot of this is on our website with our budget, but right now in the FY24 budget, you have budgeted $227,133 in the animal shelter budget, and that pays for our employees, the benefits for those employees, and also all of the operating expenses. The expense for the animal control officers who are out there picking up the animals are included in the police department budget because they are under a different department. But I also want you to know that we have 2.5 full-time employees. That's the amount of time. We really have 2 part-time and 1 full-time, but when you add all their time together, it's really 2.5 full-time employees working at the shelter. Plus, we also gave them over a year ago a variable hour employee, basically who can work as needed up to 260 hours per year. So that's 5 hours a week to fill in when someone's sick or we're really busy. There's some times of the year that's busier than others. So we believe that with the staff that we have, we can take care of the animals at the shelter with that amount of hours. So in addition to that budget that you have approved for the animal shelter, we also have allocated $84,500 this year in capital projects for the shelter. One is just over $56,000 for the HVAC upgrades, and again our coordinator spoke about how great that is, and that is just about finished, that system being installed. We also have allocated $24,000 for new animal cages, so that will be happening very soon. They're looking right now at which ones they need to order. I have also been working directly with the shelter manager, and I asked her to give me a number of what she thought was a manageable number of animals at the shelter. She feels like a maximum of 12 dogs and 20 cats is what can be housed very well in that shelter, leaving maybe a couple of empty cages so that animals can be transferred to an empty cage while they clean, those kind of things. So right now, we have well over that many animals, over 30 cats, and we have 24 dogs. It really is too much for the shelter, so we're going to be adding to their shelter policy a maximum amount. So when we get to those numbers, we will no longer take any surrenders or unwanted animals at that point. In our policy, we say that we do accept surrender animals only if there's available space. So we're going to make sure that we hold to that. We really believe that it is the responsibility of a pet owner to rehome their pet, not for us as a government entity and have the taxpayers pay for something that maybe someone made a decision they wanted an animal and now they don't want it. So we're still going to be picking up the strays and the animals that are dangerous animals as far as cats and dogs go. And at the end, we really do believe that we still need a regional animal shelter. We have rules that this is only for Tooele City residents because they are the taxpayers that pay for it. But we know that people will do things that are dishonest to circumvent that system. And we really are taking in animals that from all over the county. So we're going to continue to work with the county to try to make that happen in the future. Okay, if you'd please go to the next slide. I think that it is very important for the public to know what they can do to help us. Again, I do not believe that it is the taxpayers in general that should be taking care of the animals that people no longer want. So we know that there is a very big problem with what we call home breeders, and they're not breeding purebreds. They don't have the licenses to do them, but they're just breeding puppies in their homes and maybe cats too. And then we also have what we call accidental litters. So someone will adopt an animal or get an animal and they are not fixed, spayed or neutered, and they accidentally get out, and then next thing you know, we have baby kittens. So we have a solution to that, and that we are just really please asking the public, when you get an animal, please have it spayed or neutered if it's your pet. Breeders, that's a whole different game, but just for the animal population. I mean, I drove around today once, and I was really just driving to a meeting, but I saw a homemade sign out front of a house that said, free puppies. Somebody has puppies, and they're just giving them away for free. So we know that that is causing an issue. All puppies are cute. All kittens are cute, but sometimes when they grow up, they're not as cute as they were when they were babies, and people will get something that they really didn't know they were getting into. Which brings us to number 2, behavioral issues. If you have a dog that cute little puppy, but you get him home and you can't train them to go outside or use the paper, and you've got messes in your house, or you come home and your couch is all torn into pieces. There are ways that dogs can be trained, and if you Google it, or if you search on one of the social media sites, you will find tons of people that will train your animals. And so we're encouraging you to get a professional to help you with the dog. It's not their fault. They don't know how to act. So we just need to help them out a little bit. The other is we're asking you please to have an ID of some kind on your pet. And people do the microchip, but if you will put a collar on the animal with your name and phone number, that when we pick up that animal as a stray, before we take it to the shelter and go through the whole system, we can call you and say, hey, we found your animal. You'll be grateful. You don't have to pay the fee to get it out of the shelter, and it will save us all money and a quicker response and not take up a space at the animal shelter. So we're asking people to please identify your animal quickly so that the animal control officers can do that. The last is stray animals, and we talked about this with the shelter supervisor, that if the shelter is full and you can't surrender your animal, we are encouraging you to reach out. If you, again, Google Humane Society, where can I take my pet? I can't handle him anymore, I'm moving and I can't take it. There are many organizations throughout the state that can help you, although right now, everybody's full, we get it. But this is a way letting you know that we work with Best Friends and other groups, but when we can't take your pet, people are worried that they will drop them off and then they become the stray. Well, hopefully you will care more about your pet than just leaving it out there wandering, and we don't pick them up as the strays. But as a city animal shelter, our job is to protect the public. We want to make sure that they are safe. And so our animal control officers are there to pick up animals that are a danger to someone else, has maybe already hurt someone or another animal. We of course are going to take care of those. But the surrender animals, again, will only be taken in the shelter when there is space. So we want you to know we're working on it. We talk a lot about overworked. a lot of times, most of our staff is overworked with everything that we have got going, but we think that by limiting the amount of animals, a more humane way to take care of them, they'll be able to keep them clean, and which they already do. They're just working lots of hours to do that. So we just want the public to know, let's put a little bit of back on those responsible pet owners to take care of their animals. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Nguyen. Just for the recorded record, Councilman Graff and Councilman Hanson, I had it backwards in my mind, are both present now with us. We'll move on to item 4, which is the council members' report. We will start with Councilwoman Manzione.
Oh, I'm never
Throwing a
first.
curveball,
I'm thrown off. Yes, I went to a couple of great things. I participated at the Haunted Museum and the Downtown Trick or Treat, and I would just like to express a thank you to all the staff. I know that those are not easy things to set up and clean up after, and I got to just waltz in and have fun. So I appreciate all the people who did the work to set up and clean up, and they were very well attended, and I had a lot of great comments, especially at the museum, and how fun it was, so thank you. And then I was able to attend the mass care training put on by the Emergency Operations Center. It was really good training. I learned a lot of new acronyms, and also some resources that we could have in a mass, if there was an earthquake or something, or some other sort of disaster that we needed to provide mass care to. It was really great, and I think we have a really good system set up in Tooele County. Of course, there's always work to do, but it sounded like we have a nice plan for that. And I was able to meet with Chairman Brady, as RDA chair, with Representative Jimenez and the mayor, just talk about the upcoming legislative session and his plans and our plans, and it was a great meeting. That's all I have to report.
Thank you. Councilman Graff.
Thank you. I had a chance to attend the downtown trick or treat. I was an attendee with my kids, and so I benefited from that great event. It's actually the first time I had a chance to go, and I really enjoyed it. My kids enjoyed it more. They had more candy, and they loved it. The second thing I did, I took a cue from our last meeting about affordable housing, and I reached out to J. Fisher Company and actually toured their facility in Midvale, and I was really impressed at what that looked like. I took about an hour, well, they gave me an hour of their time, and the staff on site. It's about 200 person units, and I was really impressed. I had an expectation in my mind what this could look like, and it was not my expectation. It was far better. It was clean. It was organized. It would be a place that I would live in if I was living in that area. And I'm going to have another meeting because I'm trying to educate myself on affordable housing, attainable housing. So I'm going to meet with them and discuss the processes they went through with Midvale City, and also learning about their Park City affordable housing unit, just for my education. And so I appreciate the presentation that was made and what's the information presented, and I'm in a learning process right now. So I'll report on that. I have a meeting with them on the 9th, and hopefully at our next meeting I can give you some feedback about that. And finally, about going to the mayor's comments about pets. One of the first pets I adopted when I was married was a dog from the shelter, and the first night that we left him, we came back and he ripped up the carpet to the floorboards, and I thought, this is horrible, and I thought, what are we gonna do? But I'm so glad I took a chance on that animal, that little dog, our little hairy monster, and he enriched our lives. So I just want to echo the comment of investing emotionally in your pets. They give you what you give them. So thank you, Mary, for sharing that, and I echo we need to take care of our pets. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councilman Hanson.
And thinking about what you were just saying about the pets, and of course my wife is a dog groomer and loves pets, and me not so much, but she definitely gets invested in her pets, and she loves them, they love her, and it's an important thing in people's lives. So yeah, no doubt. We had a Downtown Alliance meeting this last couple of weeks and working on lots of things for the Downtown Alliance, and things are going pretty well down there, and the group's getting more and more organized, so it's really good to see that happen. And of course, my back's been bothering me, so I sat down and gave out candy at the Halloween thing yesterday, and it was awesome to sit down because I was right in the face of the kids. And it was cool. I mean, that was the best. Yeah, I'd sit down next time because it was a lot more fun to be in their face and smile at them and see their happiness. So that was a lot of fun and a great thing, Mayor. So that's all I got. Your turn, Dave.
Oh, well, I also attended the mass care training, and I echo what Marissa was saying. It was really good training, but then they normally do have really good training over there. And I also participated in handing out candy, but unlike Ed, I stood up.
For 3 hours, huh? Yeah.
Maybe next time I'll try sitting down.
Better try it. Yeah. It's the first time I've done that.
Then I wouldn't be throwing candy everywhere.
Well, I was throwing candy everywhere.
All right, and then, is that all, Dave? Okay. Like Councilwoman Manzione said, I met with Representative Jimenez and then attended my weekly staff meeting with the mayor and the department heads. And I don't have anything else to add to that. So we will move on to item 5, which is our discussion items. Our first discussion item is from Give Group presentation on missing middle housing opportunities, presented by Roger Baker, the city attorney, and Give Group.
Thank you, Council. I really appreciated your time and attention 2 weeks ago with J. Fisher Companies, and we're looking forward tonight to an equally great presentation and conversation with Give Group and Chris Parker. Before I have him come up, I handed to you the latest information from the Cam Gardner Policy Institute at the U about the state of housing in Utah. We've talked about the housing gap now for years and how tens of thousands of people can't find housing, let alone affordable housing, because the supply simply isn't there. If you look at if you just turn the first page back and look at the first page after the table of contents, you'll see that in 2021, the state of Utah built almost 40,000 units, which is a huge supply. But as you see, that number came down a whole 10,000 units last year. So even though we built 40,000, and that's great for the supply to meet the demand continues to climb while the new construction continues now to decline. And unfortunately, despite that construction, the housing gap continues to widen, which is a real concern. I'll just leave you to study that. In 2018, I attended the annual convention of the Utah League of Cities and Towns and attended a wonderful panel discussion about affordable housing, including accessory dwelling units and how they could help fill that gap. And one of the participants was Chris Parker from the Give Group. And when we started this discussion, I dug out my old agenda because, of course, I didn't remember his name. And I found the panel in the program and found his name and called him up, and he's happy to be here with you tonight. But I was so impressed with the company philosophy of approaching affordable housing, including social components and environmental components and sustainable construction and all of these issues that need to be part of the larger discussion, not just price, but also quality, sustainability, and those things. And I'm so glad that I kept that program and was able to get in touch with Chris 5 years later, and I'll invite him to come to the podium now.
Hi.
Hi.
My name's Chris. I'm with a few organizations. Oh, perfect. And I just flick, or I go down. Very cool. Yeah, I'm with a few organizations, two of which are called Give, and one of which is called Perpetual Housing Fund. In aggregate, these organizations are community responsive, typically development groups that help organizations that have impact as their central focus do that impact in a little bit better or bigger way. Give Communities and Give Development were formed more or less in tandem, although Give Communities, which is a 501c3, was formed first, a little less than 15 years ago. It was formed as a nonprofit that wanted to go into, at the time, blighted communities and help them kind of regain that sense of self they might have had in yesteryear. We were formed in Ogden, at the time in East Central Ogden, and operated as a normal nonprofit for a couple of years. We were relatively successful, but what we found was as we were getting, say, grants from different philanthropic organizations, our friends in the nonprofit space were not getting those grants. So with a limited pool of potential philanthropic dollars, we were somewhat injuring other causes in order to fulfill ours. And so Give Development was formed. Give Development is a B Corp. Before that was a common term, which basically does true impact work that does have an economic return and is something of the engine to the caboose of other nonprofits. So it generates revenue, and it makes sure that our sister organizations that are nonprofits always have their overhead paid for without asking for any donations. So we'll go into a little bit how these three organizations work. Give Communities, as I mentioned, is basically an organization that has great people with good ideas for the community, and it tries to build those ideas for them or help them build them themselves. An example that I'm very happy to talk about tonight is in this little town, 30 minutes west of Salt Lake City, which I've now talked to two organizations, and I'm very, very excited when I get to talk to them about Tooele. What we were brought in to do was take what was an abandoned school that you guys are familiar with and try to make it something a lot more special. What you'll end up with, and I hope everybody can attend the open house in a couple weeks, is without exaggeration, the most comprehensive approach to taking care of a community's own people experiencing homelessness. And I've looked probably in the Western United States. There is no town, no city, no community that calls itself one unit that has a more comprehensive approach to their population of this size, I think, in America, but so far I've only looked through the West. And so instead of telling people about what you guys are doing, I'd honestly just like to say thank you for doing it. The last conversation I had with people about this was a few days ago at a ULI conference. And yeah, the Utah Land Institute had a conference, and I was able to talk about some of the good work that Tooele was doing. And afterwards, had 2 counties and 3 cities approach me and say, my gosh, we didn't know this was going on. Can we learn more? Can we maybe do this in our communities? This facility absolutely will help the people in Tooele in a meaningful and very catalytic and corrective way, but it already is becoming a real example to the rest of Utah on how communities can really address their own problems in a very humanistic and great way. So really wanted to give a shout out. Here's a sneak peek of what this thing's looking like today. Very different from the first model. Really community kind of responsive. We're not talking heavy density on this. I think it'll be a beautiful facility. And we were lucky enough to help Deanne and Switchpoint really realize what they already had, which was a great idea. And we were able to raise a fair amount of federal funding, go ahead and give design and construction consulting and help this come to be. Give Communities almost never owns the facilities it helps with. It comes in, it does the work, and it leaves it to the smart people to run those that had the original ideas in many cases. So Give Community is one arm of this kind of 3-arm housing plus model. Give Development sees itself as something of a trier of new things in our ecosystem. So it will do philanthropic work. that does provide some level of return, but it will often be the first in market to try new types of financing mechanisms, new types of construction mechanisms that haven't really been done in our state, or at least not done at any scale, in addition to those works. So an example of a give development partnership with the city, Salt Lake City had assembled what was an abandoned bank building along with a couple other facilities around their civic campus. Salt Lake City Library, I think, is one of the prettiest structures we have in Salt Lake and a lot of Utah. You've obviously got the city and county building right next to it. And then they've got their public service facility building on kind of bottom right of this site. But they had this assemblage that really was the end cap to their civic campus. And what Salt Lake City wanted to do is have a demonstration project that was for everybody in their city. So is there something that we can build that will house the entirety of our population, from the very top income to the very lowest income? Can we have facilities to work at that do the same thing? And can we have places you can recreate and retail that was also responsive to the entirety of their community? And so we were able to partner with them on this deal. That abandoned bank building turned into several buildings. This is one of them. This is called the Avia building. It's 286 units on its own, and it tried to prove three things. The first was there's a stigma that you can't put affordable housing in market product, otherwise it'll drag down the market rate product. And so this was an unusual building for us in that it is primarily market rate. It's 80% market rate, 20% affordable at 50% AMI. The cheapest unit in this building, which is identical to all the other units in the building, is renting for $600, and you have some people paying $4,000 a month in this building. It's working great. All electric, with the exception of a food hall in the bottom. Chefs do not give up their gas kitchens without a fight. So were we to build this again today, it would be fully electric, but we'll call it a vegetarian building, whereas the next one I'll show you is very much vegan in its non-emission status. 17,000 feet of retail at the bottom of this building. It's also the first building, along with Maya, to be able to achieve this level of affordability without using 9% credits. There's two types of tax credits. One of them is far more scarce than the other. This is the only building in Utah to get 50% AMI without using a 9% credit. The other part, here's an interior shot. Again, this building was meant to show you can have amazing space that people would choose to live at with any level of income. That also had affordability built into it. Its partner, Maya, to the east, is a 126-unit building. This one is a third at 40% AMI, which is very hard to accomplish, a third at 80% AMI in a third market. And it does so in a micro-unit sense. This is the back of it. Some of you might be familiar with Pink Floyd, like the legend of this bird that used to live in the Great Salt Lake. Hence the mural. This is a fully electric building. Here's the front of that building. So again, Salt Lake wanted to have something that during the day people could exist in and really thrive within regardless of income. So this is a 30,000 unit or 30,000 square foot co-working facility. The most expensive office space in this building is $11,000 a month. And if you're a resident, you can get in here at $150 a month. So you do see the entire spectrum of Salt Lake City's ecosystem being able to work in this structure. And together, this is now what that sort of aerial of that project looks like. Very different than what it used to be, and the city's quite happy with it. Our first project, which I bring up, is almost in relief of the other project. The other project, in aggregate, was over 420 units. It was a 9-digit project. But our first project, we've been doing this for a while, actually, was this. This is in Ogden's Jefferson Historic District. It'd be very inappropriate to build a lot of density here. And so what you're looking at is a triplex that has 2 affordable units in the top and a 2,400 square foot, very nice market rate on the bottom that is meant to look like the homes in the neighborhood that it was in. Again, the housing that we collectively through the organizations provide, we're completely agnostic to the look. We're agnostic to the density. If a city or other philanthropic organization wants to do good, we want to help them do that good. So whatever things look like is really context dependent. One thing that Give Development does that is somewhat irregular, and I will say Jay Fisher is a great group, and they have something like this model as well. So I think you could have done much worse to have someone precede us than Jay Fisher. But typically what you have in the history of Utah organizations and cities when they have a good idea is they say, hey, I want something like housing. I've got some land. I've got some money. Let's go ahead and put out an RFP. Let's get developers to maybe show us what they can do, and we'll donate the land, or we'll give some money, or we'll give a low interest loan or something like that. The trouble with this model, and it's a good model, there's a lot of good stuff that's been built, is that in the next 20 years, Utah's population is looking at doubling, probably more so in Tooele, candidly. And if you take the scarce resources of cities now, and your model consumes what you have, so you have something and you give it away and you get a benefit, you're going to have double the need in 20 years, but you're going to have less to work with to address that need. And so what Give Development does now is it aligns itself 100% with the entities it partners with. So, a recent model we've done is like a 40-40-20 split where, some of these projects, say you do an affordable housing project that does have a return. What we would prefer is that cities get real value for their land in cash, hopefully so that they can go and get another parcel and we can get more housing, not depleting their resources. And then a percentage of the gains of these properties as well, so that war chest over time grows as the population grows that has some demand on it. So we've done 50-50 splits. We've done 40% to the city, 40% to the developer, and then 20% to the direct community around the facility. NIMBYs are given a bad rap or a good rap, depending on whether it's your neighborhood or not. But generally speaking, they're fairly correct in their charge most times. They're saying this development does nothing for me except traffic and what other thing. It's a very common refrain, and it's more or less true for a lot of developments. We found that if you have something that the building gives the community that is more than they had before, then the NIMBYism reduces, but it also allows something like a virtuous cycle with that building being for the community rather than just the people who live within it. So Give Development would do these sorts of projects. They increase capacity for cities to do more good while doing good in the process. And then the last organization is newer. This was actually founded during COVID. Everyone's heard what happened during COVID on a host of lanes. The ability for the majority of Utahns to own a home, which traditionally was something like the American dream, was more or less bulldozed. And Perpetual Housing Fund looks to rebuild the connection between where people live and how they might retire or how they might generate wealth, which now is unavailable for actually the majority of Utahns. So it combats this exact problem. Home ownership is the way that the American dream, not just aesthetically, not just picket fencedly, is built, but it is the way that the middle class was born and made. Whether or not your parents or your grandparents owned a home tells a strikingly stark story about how you're going to do economically. And so rebuilding this sense of home ownership and rebuilding this sense of wealth generation through real estate is really what Perpetual Housing Fund is made to do, because nobody else was doing it. The stats aren't pretty. The percentage of homes that are affordable, and it's only gotten worse in 2023 with the interest rate spike, is just dropping off the bottom of this map. So Perpetual Housing Fund looks to go ahead and take what our housing ecosystem is today and utilize the same tools we're using, but in better ways. So right now, federally, we give massive subsidies to the upper class and upper middle class right now. It used to be that the single largest housing subsidy we gave was the mortgage interest tax deduction federally for homeowners. And we did that for pretty good reason. The idea was stability is gained by owning your home, and your economic well-being is gained by owning your home. And cynically, a lot of these governmental employees will say, well, I either give you the tax deduction and get you in a home and have you appreciate, or I end up paying on the back end in Social Security or something like that. And so it's a good investment. The trouble is the amount of people that can access that now, which used to be the majority of Americans, is now very much the minority of Utahns. So you have this section at the top that we give a lot of money to, and they're doing just fine. They own a home. And then you have a yawning gap in the middle of everyone who can't afford a home right now, but who don't make little enough to get other types of housing subsidies. And right now they're just treading water, trying to keep everything working in their lives, and we give them absolutely nothing besides a pat on the back, and I hope you finally make enough one day to get into that top tier. And then at the bottom, we do have a fair amount of housing subsidy for the lowest income Americans, but we satisfy ourselves with 1 month injections of cheap rent. If we keep the rain off you, we've done enough. But these families typically are the ones who really could use some of the wealth generation that affordable home ownership gives more than anybody. But that's not exactly what our tools do. They're good tools, but they don't quite do anything about getting you out of the system or getting you out of the situation that required you to need the housing subsidy in the first place. So here's a couple approaches on how we solve those two parts. Here's a site in downtown or west downtown Salt Lake City. Small site for Salt Lake City. They really would like some dense, affordable ownership product. So the two ways that Perpetual Housing Fund addresses kind of the housing gap is, one, we build dense product for free. We make no profit on all of our for sale product, and the goal is to take townhomes or condos, which really are the way that you can get affordable housing, is a little bit more density than single family homes. If you have a $250,000 single family housing lot and you add any construction to it, there's no algebra that gets you to an affordable house. But if you have something like a townhome, where you might have a $50,000 lot or a $40,000 lot, you really could at least have an attempt to get an affordable ownership product if you have a development partner that's not just going to make up all of that in their profits. So this project has a couple interesting typologies. It'll have some what we call skinny towns that are both 6-bed and 4-bed. And then this one on the far right is a really interesting model as well that takes something in a 20-foot span, which is a normal townhome development, and tries to do something like a mortgage-free building for people. So FHA loans will let you get up to a fourplex using the same single-family loan that most people have on their homes. And you're allowed to get 97 or even 100% financing using FHA. So fourplex is a meaningful differentiator. What this does is it has a couple micro one-bedroom apartments in the main floor. It has another unit in the back of the second floor, and then it has a nice 3-bedroom townhome kind of sitting atop. And the theory behind that is if we can get you a mortgage that is cheap enough so those 3 units rent can cover your mortgage, we've done 2 things. We've given you something like a free building. Yeah, it'll take some maintenance. You're going to have a tenant. So you're going to do a little work for that, but generally a free building. But we've also created 3 affordable housing units without any tax subsidy whatsoever, which means you can do them more or less at will. You don't have to be beholden to a lot of these governmental programs. So very, very innovative model. We don't have it in Utah, but really looking at, again, how do you get that family that's in the middle right now so that they launch, or at least their kids launch into that top spectrum. What we might look at, and I don't think the video is going to work on this, but I'll do a couple slides. Here's what one of those kind of skinny 3 beds might look like. You know, you walk into an office environment, got a nice kitchen and a living situation, and then you have all the amenities you would have in any home anyone would want to live in. Nice places to sleep, nice bathrooms. There's nothing being skimped on in these units. They're just designed so that an entry-level family economically can get into them. And if you do a lot of those, you kind of solve this middle band. That's really what that's targeted to do. These are owned by them. They're restricted over time so that they don't just make all the profit that the developer didn't make. So they will forever and always be affordable to people up to X amount AMI. But they really let you get your foot in the door, so you're paying off a mortgage instead of paying rent. And then the last section, the people who are living in LIHTC buildings are getting subsidy, but are completely stagnated where they are, is addressed by another model that doesn't yet have precedent in Utah. Tax credits, I'm sure you guys know how they work. Generally speaking, Federal government gives you tax credits, you sell the tax credits, you have a lower mortgage because you got part of the money from selling the tax credits, and you're able to charge less rent. Most successful program in U.S.'s history for providing housing. But the trouble, at least from a wealth generation standpoint, is that the model kind of looks like this for those. Tax credits go in, they build an apartment building, the residents get cheap rent, a good thing, and then all of the money and the long-term returns go to the investors and the developer in the deal. And these can be many millions of dollars for these projects. What Perpetual Housing Fund does is it builds that same apartment building or townhome project or rental building generally, and doesn't mess with all of the reasons why you might not want to do a townhome or condo, and low-income housing tax credit specifically won't let you build a for-sale product. You have to be rental for at least 15 years. And it says, well, fine, we'll build a rental property. But at the end of the cycle, we're going to give the money away to the people we wanted it to go to. So 75% of all cash flow, 75% of all sale proceeds, refinance proceeds of these projects end up with the families that live in the building. And what that does is you end up with a model kind of like this. So one of the early projects we're doing under this model is a 9% tax credit project, which means that incoming rent is less than $1,000 a month for people. And at stabilization, so that's when everybody's moved in the building. That's not any time longer than that. That's when everyone's moved in the building. To finance these projects, the banks are going to make you have a certain amount over your debt level in order to finance the project. Otherwise, they won't let you build it. But that means it has built-in equity on day one. The whole structure is designed that you have a pad. And so if you give that pad to the residents, on day one, when people move in, it's over $40,000 per unit in this particular project. And that number goes up over time when that mortgage gets paid off. $40,000 a unit to someone making $10 an hour is a life changer, an actual life changer. And certainly as this goes down the line, and you might be getting closer to $100,000 if you've lived in there a while, that changed the trajectory of a family. Now, if your car breaks down, you don't have a choice between going to a check cashing place and paying rent. You can handle that, and your kids maybe can go to college on it. So we found a way to utilize tools that are very understood in the LIHTC program, but taking the long-term benefits and putting those in residents' hands. And here's what that might look like over time. The other thing that we do is we don't have whoever's living in the building when we have a refinance event or a sale event be the only people who reap those rewards. So if you had somebody, I think we've got an example here. If you got somebody who was in there 3 years and you got somebody who's in there 10 years, they will go ahead and get the proportionate benefit of that building when it has a large capital event, even if they haven't lived in there for years. There's 4 main ways this pays out. Every year we do an analysis about how much money the building made, and we divvy out the cash. So they'll get a rent rebate, and we do it that way so people don't pay taxes on it. They're getting it back, they already paid tax on it. You'll get a rent rebate of somewhere between $1,000 and $4,000, depending on how long you've been in the building and what the building's economics have done that year. That's the little one, and you get that every year. The bigger one is if we have a refinance event or a sale event, that's where all that equity gets liquidated. And because the residents are only 75% owners, we can take a 75% loan out and still be very safe for the banks, but get them all of their stuff out. So if you have a liquidation event, that's a big check. That'll happen whenever it naturally happens in the building cycle. And then the third way tries to get at the only downside of that model, which is if you're not going to refinance this project for 10 years, it's great to know that you have a number floating in the ether that says you're worth a little money. But if your car breaks down today and you don't have any money in the bank account, that doesn't help you, and you might still have a problem to deal with. So PHF donates. Oftentimes the majority, it depends on the project and what the project needs, but we donate a substantial portion of our developer fee, which is common in these LIHTC projects, to a 0% effectively home equity line of credit. So if you have an emergency, you need to go to school, you have a medical event, you have a car event, whatever it is, you've got something like a line of credit you can draw on your equity that is 0%. We know you've got a certain amount of equity, we're your bank, but you can draw for those emergencies and make sure that they don't turn into absolute calamities down the road. So that's the third way you can get cash. And then the fourth way is we do build for sale product, and we have a couple partners that also do. And you may happily have a situation where you're ready to buy a home in 5 years, and you know you've got some equity in there, but we're not ready to refinance the building yet. So we'll allow you to swap equity dollar for dollar into a down payment on the home you're going to buy as well. There's a few partners that work with that. It's not everybody, but for anything we build or a couple of our other partners, that's real money that went to your house. So anytime you're ready to move into something you own, you can. And that solves kind of the last chunk. Between what PHF does, we really are looking for everybody in a community, regardless of income, getting some sort of wealth generation from where they live. Yeah, and that's given PHF. 3 organizations that do housing, yes, but do housing plus. We're doing housing plus wealth generation for cities. We're doing housing plus wealth generation for families. And then if you have something that needs deep supportive services like the Harris Project, that's what Give Communities will do. Thanks for the time.
Thank you. Any questions for Chris?
I do. I always have questions. So it seems like I think it's a brilliant model. Why? Because it's a non-traditional approach to a traditional problem that we're experiencing, right? We kind of box ourselves in and looking for solutions, and you cannot solve the problem at the same level that the problem was created. You have to think outside of that. So I really like that. So going to your last product and talking about that, it seems to me that one of the aspects, and you probably address this, is education on fiscal management. Because if you have this wealth generation, but you do not have fiscal management, you lose all that benefit, seemingly. And it seems like that's needed as well. Otherwise, you have people generating money for the first time in their lives, and then they're just buying big TVs, and not to diminish them, but they just don't have that education, whether it's generational or otherwise,
Sure.
to make those decisions to actually progress themselves fiscally. So, is there a component to that?
Yeah, but before any major cast distribution, we have some nonprofit partners that just do financial education that kind of come in, and part of you getting the first big check is the option. We aren't forcing it on anyone. Ultimately, it's your money,
Right.
and we're gonna let it be your money. And a lot of low income families are very. I mean, you want to talk about a hard math problem to budget for? It's trying to make life work on $18 an hour. But for anyone that wants it, we have free financial literacy and education prior to getting that first big check, because it is a huge amount of money. And for many families, it will be the largest single check they have seen. And so what do you do with that? How do you go ahead and what are your goals for your family? Even starting that conversation allows you to think about it in ways which, were it just $1,000, maybe you wouldn't. And we've got, ultimately you're going to have people that decide a variety of things to do with their money.
Sure.
And that's on them, it's their money. Our want is to give you the chance to make really wise investments in your future. And we're cautiously optimistic that most families, if given the actual opportunity that maybe somebody in the middle or upper class got when their family gave them, something to start on, we think they'll make good decisions, but the education is absolutely going to be there for them should they take it.
And another question is, and I'm assuming that this answer is going to be a very small number. Is there an estimate of how many of these type of projects have actually been implemented in the United States?
There are organizations in the United States that are kind of swimming around the same thing. In fact, Utah has a program, which I think Tooele might have. Looking at you. They have a Crown program that they've been doing for over a decade that is kind of a lease to own. For 15 years, it's a rental property.
Right.
And then the individual, whoever's in the property at the time, can buy it at a reduced rate. Great thing to do. The trouble with that model that we're trying to address is, A, you lose it for affordability after 15. 15 years goes by so quick. And B, it seems to be like if you lived in the building for 14 years and you had to move out or wanted to move out for some reason, that person kind of being there when it actually moves over isn't exactly the most egalitarian way of wealth generation either. But it was truly innovative when it came out in Utah. Utah was one of the first, I think might have been the first state to do this. There's one project in Boston that is somewhat similar where they combine a co-op with LIHTC or something like it. I'd say the only downsides with co-ops relative to our models is typically you buy into a co-op. And so you got to have that amount of money to get in. And so you're kind of reducing the amount of the population that you can serve. There actually is no model that's exactly like this in the country. That's why we started it. And honestly, it took us 2 years to figure out how to do it well. But it doesn't, these would be among the first products of their type in the United States. We've had a lot of states that have heard of it now, or I should say people in states, since it's fairly new, that have asked us how to set these things up in their locations. And part of what we do is we're a complete open book. I mean, all of the legal back end that had to go into this, we just share. So we hope this has wide application, but for right now, we're fairly new.
My final question, and I'll hold myself to that. It seems like in this environment with high interest rates at record, well, not record because we had the 80s and 90s, but it seems like this type of model for sustainability would be more easier to implement at lower interest rates for builders and developers and such.
It's, yes, I mean, everything is easier to do with lower interest rates. What's interesting about using LIHTC in this new way is as long as the interest rates don't change on you dramatically when you've started your project, you can kind of build LIHTC in any cycle. Because the subsidy is you don't have as much debt on these projects, and so the interest rate on that debt matters less. Right now, market rate development has more or less stopped. If you don't have a project in the ground, you're not starting one right now. But LIHTC actually sees a flight to low-income housing tax credits in hard times because the developers can't build anything else.
Interesting.
So this last LIHTC round, which hasn't been awarded yet, they had 3 times as many people apply as they did have credits to give, whereas just 2 years ago, that number was more or less 1-to-1. So they'll happen. We're hoping that construction costs settle down a little bit with nobody being able to build. That has been a roller coaster the last few years. But the beauty of this, and not shaking our nose at why aren't you building condos or why aren't you doing this, is that we're changing nothing about the system that already builds in every cycle. All we're doing is on the back end legal, we're giving away the money. And that's gotten banks comfortable with it. That's gotten contractors that are scared of townhomes and condos, candidly. And that's gotten architects, some of which who will not build condo projects because they're worried about getting sued. There's a couple legal firms out of California that have literally gone all over the United States to projects about to exit their period of liability and mass torted all of them. Hey, do you guys all hate, this or this about your condo? Well, let's all get together. And so a lot of architects, their insurance will not allow them to build condos. They can only build apartments. So rather than saying that's good or bad, that's the world we live in. If we want me to build apartments, fine, we'll build apartments. We'll just give away the money on the back end.
Thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed your presentation.
Thanks.
Will you share your slides with us?
Of course. Great.
All right.
Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much.
Appreciate it. All right, we'll move on to our next discussion item, which is Resolution 2023-92, a resolution of the Tooele City Council making technical amendments to the policy allowing payment of fee in lieu of water rights conveyance, presented by Roger Baker, the city attorney.
Whose iPad is this?
It's actually Andrew's.
Thank you, Council. I appreciate it. As I was studying another issue, it caused me to look at the existing fee in lieu policy from a different perspective than I had previously. And it occurred to me that there may be a provision in the policy that could be taken advantage of against the intentions of the council. The policy says that the residential portion of the fee in lieu policy can be used on for parcels of record. A parcel of record, however, could be anything from a single 7,000 square foot parcel to acres. It's a parcel that exists because of a meets and bounds deed in past decades and centuries that didn't go through the formal subdivision process to be created, but was rather created by a legal description in a deed. So the purpose of these minor amendments is to have integrity with the council's purpose in making the fee in lieu available for a single lot split residential development, rather than someone coming in with a 10-acre parcel of record saying, your policy says I get water rights for all 100 of my homes. I don't know that that would happen, but I would just like to prevent it from ever happening. So the intention here is that if someone has a house on a parcel of record and they want to split that parcel in half to build another house on the new parcel or the new lot, that new home would have a right under your existing policy to pay the fee in lieu of water rights for their 3/4 acre foot of water instead of trying to find it on the market. That has always been the intention of the residential exception to the water rights conveyance requirement, and I just want to make sure that it's written in a way that carries out that intention. Any questions about where I'm coming from on that, what the problem might be, and how to solve it?
No questions.
Okay, this will be on your 7 o'clock meeting agenda, I believe, and we'll look forward to a vote on that later.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to our last discussion item, which is Introduction to Subdivision Process Amendments, Senate Bill 174, presented by Roger Baker.
Paul, you going to help me with that? Wonderful. Where would I be without the technical expertise of my colleagues? I would be without a PowerPoint, probably. As you recall, and we've spoken about this earlier, Senate Bill 174 from this last legislative session overhauled the state's subdivision process. The state doesn't have a lot of rules about how property gets subdivided. It mostly says cities get to decide how property is subdivided within some general guidelines set by the state. But the state has put specific requirements in the state code that require us now to overhaul our own subdivision process. So tonight, I'm just making an introduction. I'm not going to show you a single red line of the city code. We'll do that at a subsequent meeting. But Paul, if you go to the next slide. This just illustrates that our deadline is February 1st. The effective date was May 3rd of this year. So cities were given less than a year. And it's interesting, I put the legislative session date for the 2024 session for you to see that the deadline falls right in the middle of their 24 session. They're going to be in session watching to see if cities have put this in place. And the League of Cities and Towns and Tooele and other cities want to show them that we know how to get it done. What I want to walk you through right now is our existing subdivision approval process and how we as a staff are proposing that how we propose that it be. Senate Bill 174 said to city councils, you are no longer involved in the subdivision approval process. I can't change that. That's just what they've said. So instead of a city council being the land use authority, it will have to be someone else. So our first subdivision type is a preliminary plan. It's the first half of a two-part process to get land subdivided. We have a formal recommending authority, that's the Planning Commission. It must go to the Planning Commission for recommendation before it comes to you. But then it does come to you, and under the state code, you are the land use authority. In other words, you make the decision. It's specifically called an administrative land use authority. So under our current model, the legislative body is the administrative land use authority. That's what the state is changing. If someone appeals your denial of a subdivision, it goes to our hearing officer. For the final plan, final plat, Paul, not long ago, we changed it from being a Planning Commission recommendation to a staff review and recommendation, because the final plat is pretty much a technical review of engineering compliance, rather than looking at how the land is going to be used. And so right now, the Community Development Director, Public Works Director, and City Engineer caucus and decide if it's ready to come to you for a vote. And then it comes to you for a vote, and again, the appeal authority is the same. We have a minor subdivision process that's slightly different. If you have 10 lots or less, and you're not dedicating rights of way, it's just splitting land into a few lots, then you do not have to go through the preliminary plan process. They are merged into a single final plat process. That's why that procedure is the same for both the final plat and the minor subdivision. So, Paul, would you put up the next slide? Right now, the blue line represents all of the data and studies and plans that we require for the subdivision of land. And on the right side of the slide is a brown line, and that's intended to indicate that most of what we require comes in with the preliminary plan application. And the final plat is a final engineering review of all that big body of stuff that has come in already. Under the Senate Bill 174, that's being pushed to the left. Paul? That line is sliding far to the left so that the preliminary plan becomes the review of a plan from planners on planning issues. So we would be looking at how do they propose to use the new lots they're subdividing? How dense will they be? How will they be arranged with roads and open spaces and so forth? And what's the basic site engineering? In other words, can they get water and sewer to this subdivision and sewer out? We're not looking at pipe sizes or grades or all of those kinds of engineering details, but just to make sure that the subdivision can work. And that is driving our recommendation to you, which I'll show you in just a second. But as you see now, all of the heavy engineering review will come in after the preliminary plan has been approved. That's when we'll get down to the details of water, sewer, storm drain, roads, and those things. So this is not dictated by state law, but it is the structure of Senate Bill 174 of pushing to the planning end of the spectrum, the preliminary high-level view of the subdivision. And because of that, we're going to be recommending to you that the preliminary plan be reviewed by planners. Paul. One more. So the preliminary plan will now be a review of how is the land going to be used? Not the engineering, but the planning. And we have in place a body of citizen planners, that 7 of them that come together and they're trained and they look at these issues precisely. They're already doing this. It's just that they're giving a recommendation instead of making the decision. So we're recommending to you that the Planning Commission be the land use authority for preliminary plans. Now, the appeal authority, we're suggesting that we not have an outside administrative hearing officer be the appeal authority for planning issues, because typically that appeal authority is an attorney or some other professional that does not have planning or land use experience. So we're recommending to you that the city staff, community development, and public works directors select a committee of 3 persons with qualifications to be able to review a planning decision. And they would look at the Planning Commission's decisions, see if there was substantial evidence for whatever decision they made, and uphold it or send it back or reject it. So that does give some level of discretion to your department heads, those 2 department heads. But my suggestion is that those precise people know who best could be on this committee to review the Planning Commission's decision. And they would do that on an ad hoc basis. It would not be someone that's appointed and stays on that board. They would look at the appeal and say, who do we think could best hear this appeal, and select those people. Now, when we get to the final plat, the engineering-heavy review, our recommendation to you is that the city staff members with the competence to review engineering plans be the land use authority to say, yes, they've complied with all of the engineering specifications of the city for a subdivision. So you'd have a 3-person team of the community development director, public works director, and the city engineer. There's some competence. And it's not always a guarantee that they will be unanimous. So we'll be suggesting that it's sufficient to have 2 of the 3 approve the standards and specifications. I suspect, however, that by the time we get to this point, any disagreement will long have been worked out. Now, the appeal authority for a final plat decision, we don't have any discretion. The state law is put right into the state code. The legislature put right into the state code. Who is the appeal authority here? It's a committee of 3 engineers, 1 chosen by the city, 1 chosen by the appealing developer, and those 2 engineers choose a 3rd. So this would not necessarily be the city engineer. And in fact, I would suggest to you that it can't be the city engineer because he's the one helping make the decision. And you can't hear an appeal on your own decision. So that's how the appeal would work for that. The minor subdivision, our recommendation is that, again, there be no formal recommending authority, but that it be treated like a final plat. It would merge the land use issue, the planning issues with the engineering issues in a single application reviewed by the staff with technical expertise. And the appeal mechanism would also be the same as the final plat. These are our recommendations to you after spending hours and hours and hours with the bill, our current city code, and thinking through as many issues as we can. We've met as a 5-person committee 5 times, and to come up with this structure, and of course, the code amendments that will go, that form the basis of this chart. That was a longer introduction than I meant, but it still is an introduction. We haven't gotten into the specific language. Do you have any feedback for us at this point in the process, recognizing that we're still at the beginning of it?
So the committee on the first one, the preliminary plan,
Yes,
the committee of 3, they're not necessarily city employees, right? They can
correct.
recommend anybody.
I think they would not be city employees because the city employees that have the competence to do it will already have been involved with the planning commission in helping to make that decision. So I anticipate it would be other people with some kind of competence and training and education in these general areas of planning.
Any other questions or comments?
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time. And we'll take this presentation to the Planning Commission next week, and then we'll bring it back to you for a public hearing and decision on the actual underlying red line amendments that I will get to you beforehand.
Right.
So that's that schedule will get us done just before the end of the year, so we'll still have a month of cushion time if we need it.
Great.
Appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Roger. Item 6 is a closed meeting. We do not have a closed meeting tonight, so we will move to item 7, which is to adjourn. We are adjourned at 6:41, and we will reconvene at 7 p.m. for our business meeting.